Ayin Beis. We're up to chapter 73, bottom of page Kuf Lamed Vav, 136. In the last chapter, 72, the Rabbi Rashab explained Birchas Yotzer. Yotzer HaMe'eris, at the end of Psukkah de Zimra, when we move over after Yishtabach and we move over to Hamer La'aretz, it's called Birchas Yotzer. By the way, Baruch Shamar is actually, is Piskim Shemaya, Anshe Knesset Gdela, the ones who composed davening. So it says in Sfarim, I think, Eilis Ephraim, a few places bring that they received a note from heaven, so to speak, and Baruch Shamar was that revelation.
Wow.
So it's based on certain verses. Baruch Shamar has, but it's essentially it's a prayer that's originally composed. It's different than many Psukkah de Zimra, simply Tehillim or other verses. Baruch Shamar, I believe, is almost every statement there. Is not a verse, even though there's verses that are similar to it. So Baruch Shamar. Then we come to the end of Psukkah de Zimra, and there's Birchas Yotzer.
Who signed it out, though?
I don't know. And Birchas Yotzer, and there he's corresponding in the last chapter 72, the 5 things in Baruch Shamar corresponding to the 5 levels in Yotzer. But before the 5, he began that there's an introduction. The introduction says that the God of the world, with your great and intense or abundant compassions, have compassion on us, and Racham Aleinu then begins 5 levels.
Yeah, but you start the second level of Baruch Shamar.
I'm in the middle of a sentence. I'm going to say it all. Listen, I'm in the middle of explaining it. So what does he say? Elokei Elam is Atzmus, referring to Beirei Elam. When we talk Beirei, it refers to describes as best as we can describe Atzmus, which is higher than any name and higher than any description. Mitziusim Atzmusei, built to Mitzius Nimtza, the different things that he spoke about Atzmus that we can relate to some extent. Then Elokei Elam comes Rachamecha Harabim, that's Erein Sof. That's the level of the field of energy, the divine energy that brings from built to Mitzias Nimtza to Mitzias Nimtza. Now it's an existent energy, at least. But that too is before the Ratzon, before desire. Then come the 5 levels that correspond to Baruch Sha'amar. So the first level is Baruch Sha'amar, corresponds with Rachem Aleinu. That's the desire. Ola B'ritzeinei is now a desire for Elamus. A specific desire. So, as he says, Atzmus ha'er, meaning the level B'rachmecha harabim, you can't even call yet any type of desire. There, you can't even call it a makif, but it's the root of all the makifim. And the Ratzon is already the first makif, so to speak. It's the beginning of the first makif of Tehirei Allah. And that is Rachem Aleinu. Baruch Sha'amar, Hoya Elam, Baruch Sha'amar, or the words he used before, Bereish from Menusa de Malka, the beginning of the permission, the Ratzon, the desire and permission of the king, but he's still not aware of it himself. Then comes Goliv Galifu, that's Shir Atzmei B'Kayach, that's the level of Adein Uzenu, which corresponds to Baruch Hu, in Baruch Shamar. So now we have the second level.
Okay. I'm understanding how the K.A. corresponds to that, the highest level. Is the K.A. basically should have some connection to the Elam.
Beirei Elam, he's defining it not as a connection to Elam, he's defining it more as the Beirei of existence. Not so much as connection to Elam. There's different other places that may be, but here he's defining clearly. He said clearly that the K.A. is Beirei. He's talking about Beirei. That's the interpretation. This is based on, this is also the Mittler Rebbe teaches like this. You can't ask such a question. That's how they're teaching here Elokei Elam. You know, that's just the. I would say it's more the connection that the fact that the world exists, like you said, Yesh Mayin, with that we have that part of Elam is talking here. He's not talking about a relationship with Elam. It's more like he created this so-called new entity that has Ein Le'il V'Siba.
Maybe.
That's also possible. But clearly he's teaching it that way. He's not teaching it at all connection to Elam, because this is so far beyond.
What two words that
Because I just told you, because when you say that Atzmus is Hubel Vade Kechi Yicholti Lahavis Yesh Ma'ayin, it's also Elam, but he's not talking about a relationship with Elam. It's his power to create is the focus, rather than. It's not meaning God of the world. That's not what it means. It means the God, the creator of existence. That's the taich. Maybe like you say, Elokei Elam, Elokei Elam, maybe. But he definitely taiches like that. That's for sure. There's not even a. Okay, so that's now Baruch Hu. So Baruch Hu corresponds with Adeinu Zenu. I'm just going through it. Then comes the next level is Baruch Eimer Ve'Oisa, which is Ak. Okay, and this one corresponds to Sur Mizgavenu. Is it correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we're talking already after the Tzimtzum. So Tzum is Gavenu. Then comes Yitzira de Klolos Akudim, is the level of Magin Yishenu, Magin Avram Akudim. And then finally the fifth level, which in Baruch Sha'amar is Baruch Gezer Makayim, after Eimer Va'esa. And then comes the last thing in Baruch Sha'amar, the last of the original five, is Baruch Eisa Bereishis. That corresponds with Mizgav Ba'adenu, Asir the Kolos or Atzilus. Now, in breaking it further down, or in general categories, we're talking like this, in other words. So really, if you have the picture, it goes like this. Lifnei Tzimtzum. Atzmus, Elokei Elam, but I made a chart, it should be made. Berachamecha Harabim, Erein Sof. Those two are not referred to in Baruch Sha'amar, seemingly. We'll soon get to that in a moment. Because Baruch Sha'amar just starts with Baruch Sha'amar. Baruch Sha'amar begins with level 3 in Yotzer, which is Rachem Aleinu. So Baruch Sha'amar is the Rotzen. That Rotzen arises in the Erein Sof. And then you're talking two levels Lifnei Tzimtzum, Baruch Sha'amar and Baruch Chaya. That's the Rotzen, and there's the Shir Atzmei B'Keich, where he becomes self-aware of this Rotzen, where he uses expression in Shar Tshuva, a very nice expression that I would refer to in chapter 14. He says, Leida Masha B'Ritzeinei. This expression uses Leida Masha B'Ritzeinei. Goal of Galifu is that he knows what's now in his will. In other words, the will is more of a, using a human example, more unconscious. Now he knows, he goes and knows what's in his will, which means a certain type of specificity. Okay, that's Lifnei Tzimtzum. So we have now, so we got it. So we have the Yotzer, the first two that are beyond Baruch Sha'amar and Hoya Elam is Rachmecha Harabim and Rachem Aleinu. No, I'm sorry, no. Rachem Aleinu and Adeinu Zenu. Okay? That's before the Tzimtzum. Then comes the three, that's Chaya and Yechida and Chaya, just to make it more complicated. And then comes Neshama Ruach Nefesh, Bria Yitzira Asir de Klolos, which is Eimer Ve'esa is Tzur Mizgavenu, Ak. Gezer Makayim is Mizgav Ba'adenu, Akudim, exactly, Yitzira, the Klolos, and Eisa Bereishis, Baruch Eisa Bereishis is Mizgav Ba'adenu, the Atzilus. That's a Nefesh, exactly. But I want to just throw a few things in that makes it even more complicated. That's why I asked for this. What happens with the rest of the Baruch Sha'amars? Question number 1. There's another 8. What are they referring to? And so he alludes to it here, but looking at Shari Tshuva, where this is all originates from, he elaborates. So he alludes in chapter 72. I just wanted to point out a few things we read, but we read it quickly. Around third way down the page, more than a quarter way down the page, he says like this. He's talking about level 2 now. Berachamecha Harabim. Remember, that's Erein Sof. Frankly, I understand. It's easy for me to understand it in Erein Sof than in the Tefillah. The Tefillah is more complicated. So he says like this. I just want to read this. So he says, he's talking about He So he says, Eir is the Eir Ein Sof, in other words, the second level. He says, it's the makir for all the makifim. That's the expression he uses. And then he goes on to explain, how could you say that? Because Atzmus, you can't even call a makir. Well, he said that before. Atzmus Valamar in the bottom of Kuf Lamed Hey says, "Ein a gam b'chinas makir l'ratz." You can't even call it a makir, because a makir means some association, some relationship. Even etzmei you could call it a makir. That's atahu avay levadecha. Fine. So ata, real Atzmus, is a Helam and Gili doesn't apply. In Eir you can at least talk about revealed, concealed. So now he goes on and says like this. Because even though it's completely beyond any rotz and any desire, as we said, and you can't even say that within it, you can't speak about the air like you speak about the desire. Nevertheless, it's the source. So as we spoke, similar to other expressions that he said, it's the source of everything, but everything doesn't affect it. It's like the desire affects all the faculties, it does, but the faculties don't affect it in return. This is on a higher level. So it's the source of all the makifim. Now, here's what I wanted to refer to. Okay. Erin Sof, yeah. Now he's going to say, if you do it, the Yud Gimel Baruch, the Baruch Sha'amar, suddenly he's bringing all 13. What are they? Hem B'chinas Yud Gimel Tikkunei Dikna, Yud Gimel Sarachmim, Alken Em B'Mokar, Kol Hamshach B'Rachamecha Rabim. So now he's explaining why is this level of Erin Sof, that's the source for all the makifim, why is it called Rachamecha Rabim? What's the connection to Rachamecha? The answer is because all the makifim, which are hinted into the 13 Baruch Sha'amars, the 13 Baruchs in Baruch Sha'amar rather, are all rooted in what? In Rachamecha Rabim. In Shari Tshuva from the Mittler Rebbe, he adds that Racham in general is makifim, which the explanation is pretty obvious. Because when you, let's say, a person deserves something, so then it's er pnimi. You did something right, so I give you something. But if a person doesn't deserve it, he needs compassion, so you need to have an additional energy. I'm more right, not commensurate, and it's more. Therefore, it's a makif. That's. I'm just adding havana in what he's saying here. Because to explain the connection to Rachamecha Rabim. Next time you're davening, you say Rachamecha Rabim, Eir Ein Sof, you're not saying what does Eir Ein Sof do with Rachamecha. Obviously, we don't mean Rachamim as Teferes, because there's no Spheres yet. It's before the Rotzen. Definitely before the 10 hidden spheres. So Rachamecha is basically, the way I would explain it is, B'Pashtus, it means it's a surge of energy that ultimately is for existence, but it's beyond existence. It is without air doing what it has to do, the rest is not going to happen. But it's basically, like he's saying, it's a mucker for all the makifim, though it's not. Remember, there's no air, there's nothing unless there's existence. Because the whole point of it is because the Eibishter wants something. He doesn't need air for his own pleasure. I'm going to address that in a moment. It's also from Shari Tshuva. Interesting. We'll get to that in a moment. So I'm just explaining this line because I didn't elaborate enough on it.
Okay. Means an awareness over here?
Huh?
The word Ayin can be translated as awareness.
I would not use awareness, not here, because here even Rotzen is considered not awareness. Remember, legalis la'atzme, gili la'atzme. I would call, I told you, the way I would call Eir would be built to Mitzias Nimtza, manifesting in a Mitzias Nimtza dik way. What you have is a field of energy that now the first jump has been made. Built to Mitzias Nimtza, remember, is Maila from Helam and Gili. There's no relationship with Atzmus on our terms. It's only, that's Atzmus himself. Eir creates the platform, the possibility for things to happen.
It's all within himself, so I'm not sure to say energy there, is it?
I use energy because no other word. You want to use light? You can use whatever word you like. The truth is, Eir there is not considered Eir. I explained here, I think you weren't here, but I explained. Etzem Eir is the concept of Eir. Etzem Eir doesn't mean the Eir in the source, because there's no Metzias of Eir in the source. But it's the concept of Eir. Remember, it's all talking about, everything is a concept on this level within Atzmus. You say the Keichei HaGvul or Keichei HaBlikvul. You're not talking about you're going to find Gvul or Blikvul there. You're talking about within Atzmus there's that power, the Yechelis for each one. So think of Eir as being simply, in this stage, Eir is simply God's ability to manifest the Metzias Nimtza.
Is
if you want to put it that way.
Etzem Me'ir.
That, I would say something like that. That's why I use the Yechelis, even though he doesn't use Yechelis on this. But if you want to explain the Havana of it, you have to think like this. I explain like this. Etzem Me'ir is Pashtus Chadchili. You always think of extension of the light is like the light that's reaching me, and the Etzem is when it's in its source. In this case, it's not that way. It's much deeper. It's Eichus difference. It's not just source and extension. You have to think Eir is like what Eir is meant to be. It's purpose and it's kavanah. That's Etzem Eir. So it's in its purest form.
Is it the difference between Shliya and Shmiya? Did you say?
In a way, in a lower level. No, but I mean, my point I'm trying to say is hard for us to relate to because we go back to, we relate to things of Metzias and Mahus. But when you said, I gave some examples for this.
How could you explain it with CSI and Mahusai?
You begin by explaining it with an example on our level. Then you begin to abstract and say that God has the power for these two elements.
What would be with CSI versus Mahusai?
In this case, Metzias would be the Eir after the Tzimtzum. Mahus Eir would be Lifnei Tzimtzum in general terms. In Lifnei Tzimtzum itself, Etzem Eir is Pashtus Eir. If you're using Mahus and Metzias. It's all relative.
Right, it's all relative because Etzem Eir itself is his Pashtus. How could they say Etzem Eir versus his Pashtus? I mean, the whole thing of Eir is his Pashtus.
So that's why I'm explaining to you. There's a
It's a concept.
look. There's a tree, there's a seed, and there's the power for things to grow. A seed means nothing. A seed you can put on a table, nothing's going to happen to it. Okay, hold on. What makes things grow? So we say you put the seed, it has power in it, you put it in the ground, you water it, it has some magical power. Someone say, what's the etzem of the seed? Is the keich hatzmicha within it. What's the metzias of the seed? Is the physical seed and all its pieces. So basically, etzem things are generally not tangible. If someone said, what's your etzem on neshama like? So the spashtus on neshama is how it manifests. Your neshama may come from chesed, from gvura, whatever. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaychi. If someone goes all the way to yechida, it's the same neshama, but yechida is you in your purest form before it's taken on any type of expression. So the truth is, you can't speak about it as a level, like, okay, here's etzem and espashtus. It's like two levels. Like, for example, in the physical world, everything is just a matter of quantity. Something is in a state of source, like here's the source of the water, and here's the extension of the water, right? You could say, where's the source of the water in my sink? It's from a reservoir that comes from a river. I can identify the river. That's the source. That's a makir. So the difference is only the makir is where it initiates and you're receiving. There it's abundance and you have just a little. Whatever, you can give a whole, that's pure mind. Even the sun. Where does the sunlight come from? Someone says there's day outside. Why is it day? Because there's sunlight. Okay, travel. Get to the source of the sun. The sun has within it fuels to be able to generate an enormous amount of heat and light. That's it. So it's all it's very Is it similar? Of course, you go into the sun, you burn up. Impossible to be in the sun. Here we get a diminished amount of. There are planets that get don't even get a speck of light. I mean, that's. But if you speak Etzem Eir and Pashtus Eir in Ruchnius, these are mishalim to help us now. You have to eliminate the time and space element. And you have to also eliminate the quantity. There's nothing to do with quantity. You'd say like, where's the Keach Hariyah or Keach HaSeichel in Etzem HaNefesh? Let's talk before we talk about it. How would you define that if someone asked you? You'd say you have to imagine it. You can't define it. You could say Etzem HaNefesh. We know that if I have seichel that I could think of, it means that somewhere it's coming from, because a corpse doesn't think. So it's not the brain that's generating ideas. There's some force that's in the soul that energizes the brain, and the brain now is able to conceive of ideas. So we go from that. This is actually, I'm using examples from the Maimorim about Baruch Shamar. So we know from this, like the Rebbe Metler Rebbe says an expression, sounds like it's the Alter Rebbe. Because if not, where did the seichel come from? He says, if there's nothing behind the curtain, so the examples we use, let's say, of sunlight or nefesh or echayes hanefesh or water even, is only an example to show you that if there was water here, you have to say there's water there. That's all that's an example for. After that, the example starts getting weaker and weaker, obviously. That's why all these examples are meant to make it as much palatable to us. But then it's why we qualify and say the sun at the end of the day is still forced to light sign, and it's nothing but a sun. And Atzmus is higher than that. The nefesh has mashallah, but the nefesh is mugded in the guf. And Elokus is not, all these, but it's not, so someone says a question, why are you giving an example if you're later going to qualify that's not good? Because the example helps us at least, train us to get from here to here. Now you're going to need more to get from here. I mean, it's really the same journey we're talking from Ruchnius.
Right, so now we're at that point.
Okay, so now, this, I'm explaining, I mean, I thought I explained it, but I let's put it this way. I can tell you this, as many times as I explain it, even to myself, it always can use a refreshing, because we're not trained to think like this. We think, you see, for the water part, a child, it'll take a little while to explain. If we have water in a cup here, you should know this water came from somewhere. But for us, it's obvious. You don't need to know that electricity is coming from somewhere. First of all, you have a Con Ed bill, so someone's charging you for that. Means that they're generating it, or else things just come. Okay, like the insurance companies, when it comes to insurance, they have no problem saying acts of God. Then suddenly everyone's a believer. And you need a scapegoat. Who caused the hurricane or flood? That's God. They don't say nature, acts of nature. They say acts of God. The point I'm making here, no one there complains church and state. Mitamal acts of God, no problem in every insurance policy. It comes to guilt. It comes to money. No, my point that I'm trying to say, okay. So now let's go there. This is exactly back to the subject of understanding Asiyah Ruchnis till we get Avnei Tzimtzum. But you could relate to it because we have Mepsarech Zalakah. That's why I gave the example of the unconscious, like throwing the ball at the invisible wall. So now you need to go with a lot different type of tool. You've gone through the tool of, okay, I know if I have seichel, that means I must have something behind the door where the seichel is coming from. You could even extrapolate and say, okay, that thing is more of just like ideas are amorphous. You don't open a brain and find ideas. Okay, I can understand there's a state where I'm not conscious of my ideas. For example, you have right now millions of ideas in your brain. You only think of one at a time. 2 + 2 is 4. But you have other ideas, and you can retrieve them very quickly. So if someone asks you, what state do they reside in when you're not retrieving them? You'll say, call it whatever you want. Unconscious, subconscious, invisible, amorphous, whatever word you use for it.
Whatever state that is, that's esemer?
No, not yet. No, that's not etzem. That I would say is more like the second level. That is Chochmas Tima of Arich Ampen. Where the other Maimorim call that actually Baruch Emer Ve'esa. And Baruch Hu. Baruch Emer Ve'esa is already when it's coming into Chochmah. But then the state I would say that is beyond, but that's also not an easy state to understand because we don't relate to it. It's not like no one's ever seen behind that door, but it's not difficult to relate. Ideas. I mean, it's not. I just gave an example. Right in your brain are residing hundreds and hundreds, thousands of ideas. The fact that you're not conscious of it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means you're your limited consciousness. So the flow. It's exactly like the reservoir in the water, except that now it's not Gashmis anymore. So the river, you can travel with your family and go see the river where you get your water from. Here you can't travel there. Yet remember, everything is Mamayil Lamata, that started from there. That's also a difference. You see, when it comes to the river, people can relate to because it's Mamat Lamata. Okay, from my little cup of water, I come to the source of the river. Here, the truth is it travels the other way around. It starts from, okay, so what's this door behind the door? In our context, we can call that perhaps Etzem Ha'er. I wouldn't even call this Etzem, but I'll call it Etzem just for the example. This is we'll call it, the one that we just said about is you can retrieve the Seichel whenever you want. It's just right now, it's Behelim. It's like Mitzia, what I said. Chochem Ayin Temotza. You know that there's someone dropped this, but you don't know who it is. You know that, you could say who about him, but you can't say Ato. But that's already a level relatively commensurate to. Then there's a level where it's hu be'etzem, let's call it. It's fundamentally impossible for you to know, because even if you were able to document all the ideas in your mind, there's still a koyach that is beyond it all that you can never enter, that generates it all. So it's like the generator of the generator, and you can go many levels. If you go with this level, the question is how many levels there are. It's probably infinite amount of levels. What Chassidus does is try to categorize it, at least for us to be able to relate to. So I would say like this: Atzmus, I won't even talk about now, because Atzmus is b'chlal not in this league. Once Eir Ein Sof exists, Etzem Eir is in Esis of Neshama, is Etzem Neshama. You have the essence of of everything, but it doesn't yet have any shape and form. And all it really is the power of the source to express. But there's no expression yet. It's the root of all expression. But without that, you don't have the rest of the steps. That's Etzem Ha'er. Etzem Ha'er is like the concept of bittul. Not bittul itself. You can't touch bittul. What is bittul? If you were able to conceive of bittul in its fundamental nature, that's Eir. Etzem Ha'er. Ultimate bittul. That's really what it is. And that's why it's able to be a kaveir, or, we use the word emission. It's the first emission from divine essence. Atzmus is not, etzem le'ebilti mispashet. So there's no emissions from the Atzmus. This is the power of God's emission. So the key thing is to remember, not that Eir is another level outside of Atzmus, God forbid. It's the power of Atzmus to emit. What we would call emission in existential terms of Metzias Nimtza. Because God could also emit things that are not infinite. It also contains the finite. But I wouldn't just use it by infinite power. I would just say it's first emission from a. Let's put it this way: it's not built to Metzias Nimtza anymore. You have now Metzias Nimtza, but you can't do anything more with that. Then comes Ratzon, Spashus Eir. That's where Ratzon takes place. What I just said is Rachmecha Rabim. Then comes Rachem Aleinu. There's already an Aleinu. So there's a Ratzon. But Ratzon is also officially still like Radla. It's Baruch Sha'omar, it's still a state of absolute impossible to. Even it itself does not know itself yet.
Is that like ideas that are in the brain? They haven't access to it?
No. I would say, if you really break it down, it's the deeper level. It is even besides conscious ideas, there's three levels. There's the door behind this. The Shir Atzmei B'Keach would be the place where you're not accessing it, but you could access it. That would be Shir Atzmei B'Keach in this context. Ratzon would be. Radla would be fundamentally impossible, but it's a Ratzon is there. And then there's Eir. It really needs a lot of explanation. You need good examples, but the best place to really relate to is our own unconscious. Another place to relate to is, if you know quantum mechanics, there's also very good examples there. Because, you see, this table, no physicist, no scientist will call this a table. They'll say the table is just a so-called an outer reflection of a bunch of energies that are interacting with each other. But energy you can't see. And the energies, as they combine, they project different type of things. It really requires, when you want to really understand this, it requires real abstract thinking. And really understanding that physical reality is just a very surface level. Don't even think of it as anything valuable in this context. It's only valuable because Atzmus wants it. But it has no value in defining something. It would be the equivalent of what I say, let's say in psychology, where someone comes to you with a problem, a deep problem, let's say a couple. So the problem they'll always tell you is never the problem. Not because they don't know, not because they're lying, because they themselves don't know. They know symptoms. We know symptoms, that's all we see. That's human beings. So to really see a problem, you have to find the so-called the energy level of the problem. What's the root of the issue? What is the deeper root of the issues? And that is never as defined or has the parameters that we can relate to. So you get comfortable with this when you get comfortable with the invisible and understand the invisible is what shapes the visible, not the other way around. The problem that most people have, I find, at least initially, is visible. They worship the visible and they cannot get beyond it. That's the first step. I'm talking about in real training, because I'm not saying you or any, I don't know, truth, I never tested it. But it comes down to this. The more you learn to the higher level, the more you relate to Ruchnius, the more you can understand these type of things. And the biggest trap is some people are very mugushim in their thinking, even if they're very smart. They just do not think outside of what they see with the senses. They don't think beyond the senses. Such people usually probably cannot give, for example, good psychological advice because they don't understand what causes things. They think only in terms of I see the effect. They don't really look to the cause. And we're trained. We're trained to think like this. We're trained to be go-getters. We're trained to be aggressive. We're trained to survive. So
there's the difference between a physicist and an engineer.
Right. So when you really start thinking like this, what you're really looking to do, I would even go now to Atzmus or to this. If I was really giving a real class in this in depth, I would help the students simply get to a place beyond where they think, start thinking a little more sublime. Then you move them along. Because he's talking, the Rebbe Rashab is talking this is the Rebbe Rashab speaking. So he's there. So this is heavy, with this Perek here, in the last program, you could see he's been Megala exactly how he sees it. And also, L'fiyerech us. So you're not talking here, what I'm saying is it's critical is to begin to, that's why I gave the examples of the mind. And I think the Maimorim, actually where the Ayin Beis comes from, they actually elaborate on this a lot more than the Rebbe Rashab does. This Keich HaMaskal example is not mine. They keep saying, they talk about Seichel. In other words, to understand that law, you have to first understand the Helam that you could relate to. And then you come to realize there's a state. I gave an example of, what's your left leg doing right now? You don't even know until you think about it. In other words, consciousness itself, this statement that I'm going to say now is one that makes people very uncomfortable the first time they hear it. Not you anymore, because we've spoken about this. People, when you say consciousness is limited intelligence, people say, what? Awareness and consciousness is like everything. Most people are not aware, and I'm aware. No, awareness means there's two things. There's you and what you're aware of. If you're really in the moment, you're not aware of it. You are it. That's your daita v'yisef type of thing. That is a critical component in all of this as well. Because when you talk on Etzem doesn't see two things. If you had an interview with Atzmus, Etzem Ha'ed, it wouldn't talk to you like we talk. You have this and I see this. Etzem Ha'ed will say, we want an existence. The Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu, and I'm here to make sure it happens. I'm not saying those are the words, but you get the idea. It doesn't speak in terms of object, and the Ratzon is already a defined desire for the worlds. We're not talking about Ratzon and Atzmus and the Sava. We're talking now Ratzon as a shape now of like he called it, an Inyan Prati, whatever it is. And then you get to the Ratzon itself is not yet conscious of itself. Then it becomes consciousness. When Adam and Chava, before they ate from Eitz Hadas, the question is, 1 second. If they didn't know Teverah, how could they defy God's Ratzon? God said, don't eat. They didn't yet eat from it. So where they have the ability to do something that's Ra? So one of the explanations given, this is based a little on the Rambam Mer Nevuchim. What Eitz Hadas? It says, doesn't say Eitz HaChochmah or Eitz HaBinah. Das is intimate knowledge. A tzaddik that never did a tzaddik that never did an avera also knows his ra, but he knows it from the books. He knows it from observation. Big difference than when you taste from it. Many times we say to ourselves, "Hey, I know about it. I might as well. What's the big thing if I do it?" No. From knowing to doing is the difference between life and death. Once you do it, once you lose your innocence and do it, it's a whole different. They knew Chochmah, but of course they knew there was right and wrong because they were human beings with intelligence, but they didn't taste. They didn't taste
das
it.
with every animal there, and they do das with everything else. They just exclude from that one thing.
We're talking about das of Teverah. We're not just talking about das. Period. They had the Adam Yodas Chava. There's an intimacy like that. We're talking about the knowledge. Yeah, but I'm talking about das of Eitz Hadas. It's a particular experience. Now, what does it really mean? What happened? And why were they before they were naked and they were not ashamed and suddenly used Beishishu? What happened? The answer was they became conscious of their nakedness. Before, they were like children. A newborn child is not ashamed of being naked. There's nothing wrong with it. God created you with eyes and ears. He created you with sexuality. If it's a divine force, it's a divine force. There's that innocence. But now that they were margish themselves, that's what he says, das is margosha. Now they feel it. Oh, there's me and there's my taiva. There's me and there's you. It wasn't no longer a seamless individual just fulfilling God's will. And understanding there's Ra, so I have to conquer it. Now you have a person who's ready and a gay bedover. Now I already have interests. And I like this and I don't like that. Bottom line, it created what we call the world of duality, of object and subject. What's a subject and object? There's a gavra and a chefza. You could say before Eitz Hadas there was no gavra and chefza. There was a gavra and chefza technically, but the conscience, it wasn't like I was conscious of something else. It was all one flow, so to speak. My point that I'm trying to make is that consciousness in this sense, I have a whole article on this if you want to read it. I explained it pretty well, I think. Consciousness means I'm aware of something. Like for example, when you say Mola Oris Deis Hashem Kamayim Layam Mechasim, the world will be filled with divine knowledge, das, like the waters cover the sea. You will be knowledge. That's why it's like the waters cover the sea. It's not like today you can know something. Okay, I learned a piece in Ayin Beis. Now I know something that I didn't know yesterday. There's a point where you become one with it. When we say like a fish is one with water. Or you say, for example, does water get wet? No, you say water is wetness. Do you become alive or are you alive? It's not like, that's why it's when the neshama goes into the guf. It doesn't say, you don't say, oh, life has entered in the body and I feel it. We don't feel it that way. When your body is alive, you feel like it's one thing. You don't feel, like for example, if I filled up a cup with water, a moment before the cup was empty, now it's filled with water. If I turn on the light bulb was before it was dead, and now it's alive. Once the neshama goes into the guf, you don't feel a duality. You don't feel, I feel like energy flowing through your veins every second. And if you stop it, God forbid, you understand that is that way. But you don't feel it. Meaning to say, health doesn't feel like anything. Consciousness and feeling is already a level. But it's a level necessary for existence to come into being. The way God wants existence, He wants consciousness. But if you ask, the root of consciousness is a state of divine expression. I'm just trying to explain here some of the levels in different atheists and so on. It needs a lot of thinking because you have to come to a point. I'll tell you what the real test is. If you can explain this to someone else, you'll be in good shape. If you can't, then it's still words that you can relate to. See, maybe what's making sense now is because I'm making sense. But if you really want to get it, you're going to have to think about it and find your own examples. And ultimately, it's really understanding what the Elokus is. Elokus is not human. You're never going to get it that way. If you try to fit it into our, you have to come to a point where the examples we use bring you one place, and then you have to strip them, and then use new examples.
This point of consciousness is not a good thing.
I didn't say that. I said it's a limited thing. I didn't say not a bad thing.
It's a limited thing. No, I can totally relate to it. I mean, if somebody is walking in a high wire and starts thinking about it, it's no fault.
100%. I'll show you a whole bunch of other examples. Like there's a lot of examples.
Driving.
When you're really, look, I can tell you as a writer, when you're really in the zone writing and it's just flowing, it's just you don't feel yourself. It's just coming through you. As soon as you start feeling, you lose it. There's a being in the zone. It's a being in the zone. It's where the person melds together with experience. That's the highest level of unity in our experience. But what you're coming to realize is that we are such creatures of duality that we relate to that, but it's not something we just naturally have every second. There are examples. Life is that way. The life force within the body is that way. There's no duality going on. You cannot distinguish between the eye and the power to see. You can distinguish with your seichel, and you realize it. But when they come together, there's a certain element of seamlessness. So anyway, I wanted to go back here to Baruch Shamar.
Unless there's a blockage, and then that's when...
Yeah. Okay, so he says now the Yud Gimel Baruch Shamar is Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim, and that's where all the Makif. And he also says that Yud Gimel Baruch is also they're all Makifim. Now remember, he said the word Makifim there Yasher, Makifim there Chezer. And Baruch Shmei Hu Hamakar Hakel Kulam. Let me just tell you what that line means, and that's taken straight from Sharat Tefillah from the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe goes on, where the Rebbe Rashab does not go on, in chapter 9. He goes on to explain the other Baruch Shamars. Okay? And he says like this. The first 5 are Makifim of Yasher.
Baruch Shamar is Baruch.
The Baruchs of Baruch Shamar, right. The other 5. He says, the first 5 are Makifim of, and they climb like this, Nefesh, Yechida, Chaya, Neshama, Ruach, Nefesh. But then the next 5 is a Makifim de Chezer. What's a Makifim de Chezer? So he says something very valuable, I think, even to our discussion. He says, even though Eir Ein Sof and those higher levels need to go through a whole state of diminishing until they bring existence into being. You need Baruch Shamar and Baruch Chaya, Baruch Hu, and Baruch Emer Ve'esa, and Baruch Gezer Mekayim, and Baruch Esa Bereshis. He says, but they wouldn't have come up in the first place if you didn't have the kavanah for the safe ma'aser machshava tchila. That's what he says. I'll just read to you a line that he says, a very powerful line. He says like this. says Seif Ma'ase Zeh da gam shebebchinas ha'izgalus kasher rotzen bo degili hine husof hakol haba achin avol be yes harotzen hazeh kol ba'atzmus bepirush baruch she'amar hine tchilas hamachshav harotzen hu loy hazeh loy hoye b'shvil etzem harotzen hazeh levad shari hutzrich l'samtzim ba'atzma ele eino rak b'shvil Seif Ma'ase.
Could have done it another way also. It's not only because of safe mindset, the way it is now.
So bottom line is that the whole purpose of this whole Rotzen was in order to bring the end process in mind. So even though we're talking now the highest levels before the Tzimtzum, it is, however, Mamat that's Er Chezer, because Er Chezer is the purpose. Er Yosher is the process, how it comes into being. Er Chezer is the energy that returns. So if you ask those levels, they'll say, you know what? The lowest level is the first level. Because of that, that's why we all came into being. And that's what he says is Baruch Merachem Al Haaretz. And now he's saying that the same Yechida, it started with Baruch Sha'amar, is Mamayil Lamata. It goes Yosher, Baruch Sha'amar, Baruch Hu, and so on. Now, Baruch Merachem Al Haaretz, that's Yechida. I'm sorry, not Yechida. That's the end, but it starts now, you start from the beginning, you go Mamat Lamayil, and you count, the first one you count now is the lowest one. So when you go straight in the process, the highest level is the one that is most amorphous and most infinite, so most beyond existence. When you go from the bottom, the first one you count is the purpose, is Haaretz. Then he moves to Brias, and he explains how the next 5 in Baruch Sha'amar are Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida, but upside down. Meaning you go from the bottom up.
So you go down to
The next 5.
Nefesh, and then you say another nefesh, or that same nefesh
No.
is going up.
No, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai,
It
Yechida.
goes down to nefesh, and then we get another nefesh, or do we just that nefesh is the?
Yeah.
No, it's a good question, but it's probably a lower nefesh, because the lowest nefesh there is Atzilus. Remember, the lowest nefesh is Baruch Emer V'Esa. Baruch Esa Bereshis is Chachma V'Atzilus. That in turn creates Biyah. You could interpret it both ways. It depends how you go. It's Asiyah. It is Asiyah the Klolos. So you could say that is Baruch Merachem Al Haaretz. You could say it goes that way. I could see it going either way. Either way, it's probably more consistent to say that same nefesh is now climbing, but now that's first. It's interesting how this is hinted all in Baruch Sha'amar. It's like,
But there's still 3 left, right?
hold on. That's what I'm going to get to. The last 2 he doesn't explain. That I don't have what to say. I can just tell you about the 11th one. So he refers to it here. The reason I'm mentioning it is if the Rebbe Rashav didn't refer to it, not necessarily have to bring it. So now it goes like this. The interesting thing, he likes the Hanigladika thing. You know what he says? Baruch Merachem Al Haaretz is a nefesh, and it comes first, and he says, but why does it come before Baruch Merachem Al Abrius? He says, because Eretz is the land itself, and Brias is the creatures of the land. And he brings a raya from the Mabul, that the Eibishter said, that like this, he brings an interesting raya, he brings like this. He says, we see God, but after the Mabul, he spoke about both things. He says, but he brings a raya that the land is more important even than the creatures on the land. There's his proof. 1 second, I want to just see.
Because the land shows Atzmus, no?
Right, exactly. Here, he goes like, Yocheliya shehem al ibud. He goes like this.
Nature is so important.
L'zona moitzim shegam al ibud ha'oretz begashmis b'tzameach v'deim mishabay huchas kamoy b'mabel. He didn't only care about the creatures that were created, the land itself. So he says in parentheses, he says, "V'yochel liyah shehem al ibud haaretz hagashmi yesem al abrius liyesei boy shleimus harotzen," like you said, kenir b'chush. So he says, "Kenir b'chush al gzelas binyan beisei v'sadehu yesu yagia ba'atzmus ha'odam al sheiri v'chamere." That when a person loses their land or their field, they have more pain, they care more than if they lose their sheir and chamer. Interesting. That was the ox and the donkey.
Even the slaves.
Lekach Omer leisachmet beis lecha v'achakach sadehu. That's why it says leisachmet beis lecha and then you say sadehu. Interesting touch, huh? So bottom line.
People, you mean like the slaves also, the sheriff and maid.
Yeah, but Brias, then he goes on, then he says like this. Then from Brias you come to the next level. That's nefesh, that's ruach. Okay? I'm just reading them now. Baruch Mishalem Schar Tov L'Reyav is neshamas. That's neshama. Okay? Baruch Chai La'ad V'Kaim, that's a Chai. It's Chai. And Baruch Peida Matzel is Yechida. So we have now the ones backwards. So basically, Baruch Peidem Matzil corresponds with Baruch Sha'amar, and Baruch Morach Malaris corresponds with the last of the five. Then he concludes and says Baruch Shmoi, and Baruch Shmoi is what takes us back to Baruch Hamecha Harabim.
Oh, it goes to the two highest.
To the one before Baruch Sha'amar.
One or two?
One. Atzmus, here he doesn't go to Atzmus here in the Mittler Rebbe. Baruch Shemai is Amokar Akel Kulam. That's what he says, Amokar Akel Kulam. That's the air, that's the makif, the root of all the makifim. And he explains why Baruch Shemai is that. And you want to know another interesting thing he says? He says the first five Baruch She'amas is the opinion that Shemayim Oretz, Shemayim Kodmu. The second five is Oretz Kodmu. And Baruch Shemai is the opinion that they created together. Because and Shemai is B'Shava, Shemayim V'Oretz. Interesting, huh? He connects it all. It's unbelievable when you read it. You understand what I just said? So when the process of creation, in other words, someone says to you, what's the purpose of creation? What's the process? You start first from Ruchnis, then you go to Gashmis. So, for example, someone will say, like even a Chumash, that Alter Rebbe asked the question in Shemitah. Kisavoy Aloretz, V'shavsa Hashem Shabbos L'Hashem, V'shavsa Oretz Shabbos L'Hashem, then it says, Sheishanim tiz Sadecha, Sheishanim tiz Mekarmecha. Then it says Shana Shvi is Shabbos L'Hashem. So what's the redundancy? She explains, because first it starts the kavanah. The purpose you should know when you enter the land is Shabbos. Now the process is one, first you work and then like the Shammai. On Sunday he already started thinking about Shabbos. But the bottom line is at first you have to have a Sunday. Creation, the kavanah was Shabbos, but the creation started with Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, and so on. Yom Sheni. The point being is Yosher always refers to the process. If you ask how does the process work, first comes Eid Ein Sof, Ratzon, Shir Atzmi B'Kayach, the Tzimtzum, the Kav, Ak, Yakudim, Brudim, whatever, and so on. If you want to know purpose, is the other way. Oretz Kadma. That's Shemayim Kadma. That's when Shemayim Kadma. That's the way it works. You want to know the purpose? That's the land is the purpose. The whole purpose is the end. Seif Ma'aser B'Machshav Tchila. And that's how we climb from the bottom up. And then there's a level, Baruch Shemai, that has both together. And that's the third opinion in the Gemara, that Shemayim Baruch were created together, because totally equal. So there's a place where Mamayla, Matlamayla completely don't matter. I mean, maybe that's another way to understand Oyer as being beyond. The Ratzon has to be the first process of Ratzon of a house. He wants to build a structure. So it's maybe unconscious Ratzon. But it's the beginning. Oyer, on the other hand, is a place where everything is there. One, the kavanah of Dira B'Tachtenim, and the process of how he's going to do it is all one there. I think that's a very very helpful way. Because in Atzmus, it's all about Atzmus. Eir at least has the certain state of consciousness of the whole picture, but not yet in any form of structure. Now, what this is all hinted in Baruch She'amar. He doesn't say what the last two are. The truth is, the first 11 really end the small baruchs. Then comes the big bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam ha'kela over. Then comes Baruch Atah Hashem melech mahul b'tashbachos. I'm sure later on he talks about it, what these last two are. I'm not sure what they are, but that's what he says. The reason I'm explaining it is because all this is hinted to right here. So Baruch Hamecha Harabim and Baruch Shmai in Baruch She'amar is similar. Now Elokei Elam doesn't seem to exist in Baruch Shamar, unless it's the last, maybe that's the last bracha. Could be. I think he does say somewhere, he says, man. Here. Where it says, he's going back to the Baruch Shmoi. He does refer to that. In other words, the last two probably are an elaboration on Shmoi. If you read it, I guess only with the Rabbeim here, you can understand why this was a Piskim and Shmaya. Because if you ask a plain, Pirush HaMillas guy, he'll say, okay, Baruch Shamar, why is it different than the next bracha? It's about blessing God. Yeah. So here, if you want to have a Pishkish, it's a note from heaven. Now you can relate a bit to a note from heaven, because no one else can tell this to you but from heaven. Who would ever figure out? That's how you read them, even the first 5 and then the next 5. Anyway, then he goes on and finishes the Perek, and then we'll continue on. No, this is the Mittler Rebbe's Chiddush. I'm looking for the Alter Rebbe saying it. The Alter Rebbe brings the Siddur Arizal. I told you, Baruch Shamar starts from Ak in the Siddur Arizal. And that's how the Mittler Rebbe explains it in Siddur. It's in Sharet Tefillah where he takes it to this whole level that we're talking about. The Rebbe Rashab is Chidushim in Sharet. For example, the Mittler Rebbe, there's no word Ak mentioned, and there's no, but you see the Klolos, and Bria the Klolos, and Asiyah the Klolos. When you read the Friedrich Rebbe Rashab, you see Havana in Sharet Tefillah you can't really fully understand here. But it's all here. It's very here. It's like a yam, like Bina. It's all here and in detail. And he's referring to it. You see, you can see the things he's bringing. This is where he says, Baruch Shmei, Makar Kulam. He didn't mention Baruch Shmei. That's why I went to look. I was going to read the Sharet Tefillah just quickly. If you want me to read it, I could read it. You could see how brief it is here. But it's very similar to what it says here. This is very, very similar. Yeah. At the beginning of chapter Yud in Sharet Tefillah, what we just read, Okay. So then he continues, and he asks, for example, the Sharet Tefillah doesn't explain why Adonu Zenu is the Shir Atzmi. He also doesn't say Shir Atzmi B'Keach. He says the words, but he doesn't explain the levels. The Rebbe Rashab actually delineates. From the Mittler Rebbe alone, you could not know it was Ak, and you wouldn't know what Shir Atzmi B'Keach was. You'd know there's a level of Baruch Shamar, that is the general Ratzon. You know there's a Shir Atzmi B'Keach, but you're not sure exactly which level it is. And then after the Tzimtzum, there's the other 3. But he doesn't spell out the levels quite that same way. The Rebbe Rashab adds, for example, what do you say, Adenu Zenu, because it's a makif Shir Atzmi B'Keach, he says, is the B'chinas Hashar because Ayin Baruch Hu. Why is it called Adenu Zenu? Because the makif of Chaya has a relationship with the Primi and gives it power, strength. Then the 3 makifim, he also explains them also the same way. Everything is more spelled out here than it is in the Mittler Rebbe. He explains it more. But he definitely says it here. If you want, I could read the Sharet Tefillah if you like. It's a half a page. I'll read it. You have your copies if you like. It's 54. It's page 54. I'm going to read this. You want to pass it out? Pass it out. I have not seen it. Oh, where are the other ones? I had one more copies. What happened to them? It's basically this page, 50, what did I say? 54. Give everybody 54. I'll read it quickly. Okay. So I'm reading Sharet Tshuva, which is Sharet Tefillah and Sharet Tshuva, the Mittler Rebbe. We had learned, if you remember, we learned chapters 8 and 9. 8. No. Not yet. Yeah, 8. I marked here on the side of my Sharet Tefillah what the Rebbe Rashab adds. Actually. So anyway, in chapter Yud, he says like this. V'cheinu inyan. To remember, the chapter before he explained the Ur Chayzer that I just explained. The Baruch Merachim ala Aretz and all that, right, is if you look right before chapter Yud starts, you see it says Gam etzah b'chinas harachma al shofar Yesu yimshach rachma b'rabim. That's why it says Baruch Marachma al Oretz Lish Sharshe b'tchilas harotzen. V'hu mashkos tchila Baruch Shem v'haya elam b'pel mamish davkim misham davkim mishkos makifim not seif b'tchilas v'seifim b'tchilas v'seifim b'tchilas. That knows Baruch Marachma al Oretz has within it the highest of Baruch Sha'amar, the ultimate, the source of the makif, the rotzen, because that rotzen wants the Oretz. Now he goes on. And this is also the inyan what we say. This chapter Yud is exactly the content of chapter 72 that we just learned in Ayin Beis. Listen to the difference here. You see how the Rabbi Rashab adds. Remember, we just learned how Elokei Elam is Atzmus, Mitzusim, Atzmusi, built Mitzias Nimtza. There's no words like this here. He's just going to say briefly 3 lines. What's Elokei Elam? Hu Misha Amar V'Haya Elam Hanal Bal Harotzen HaPoshet Shebatzmusei Mamish Nikra Rachamecha Harav. One second. Pirush Elokei Elam Hu Misha Amar V'Haya Elam Hanal Bal Harotzen HaPoshet Shebatzmusei Mamish Nikra Rachamecha Harabim V'Hu Moker Kol HaMakifim. Those 3 lines, the Rebbe Rashab has almost most of the chapter just explaining those 3 lines. Right. Well, Elokei Elam, he's teaching Misha Amar V'Haya Elam, meaning Bal Harotzen HaPoshet Shebatzmusei. Right. He breaks it into 2. It's 2, but it's really 1. Sorry. Here, it's hard to understand what's what.
He says, he combines them.
Right. But if you read it, Elokei Elam is what's Elokei Elam? So the Rebbe Rashab says that's Atzmus. And B'Rachamecha Harabim is Eid Ein Sof that comes out of Atzmus. That's the Moker Kol HaMakifim. Basically, the Rebbe Rashab is saying you can't say Atzmus is the Moker. The Rebbe Rashab's big chiddush here is Elokei Elam. He explains what Elokei Elam is. But it's hinted to. If you read the Rebbe Rashab after, you read the Shari Tshuva after the Rebbe Rashab, after Perek Ayin Beis, you see the words Bal Harotzen HaPoshet Shebatzmusei Mamish. You see the Rebbe Rashab is understanding that you can't say that Bal Harotzen HaPoshet Shebatzmusei Mamish is Rachamecha Harabim. So you have to say there's 2 levels here. When you read this alone, it's not clear, because what's Elokei Elam? Basically, the way to read it, here's how I would read it now that I know Pshat from Ayin Beis. Read like this: Elokei Elam hu Misha Amar V'Haya Elam Hanal Bal Harotzen HaPoshet Shebatzmusei Mamish, and that is Elokei Elam is Atzmusei Mamish, and that manifested in a second level called Nikra Rachamecha Harabim, hu Moker Kol HaMakifim. Now, when you read it, for example, when you read the Poshet Pshutei, you read like this: Elokei Elam B'Rachamecha Harabim. What does it mean? God of the world, Creator of the world, in His infinite compassion or His abundant compassion. You're talking about the same. You're talking about Elokei Elam. You're not talking about two levels. But what you're saying, Elokei Elam is Misha Amar. That's Atzmus Amar, and that Amar manifests in a Rachamecha Harabim in Eid Ein Sof. That's how the Rebbe Rashab is reading this line here. V'hu Moker Kol HaMakifim. This is actually quoted here. You hear? So these are like 2 levels, and afterwards break into 5. The Naran Chai, V'Makev Harishan Makev Dichid Dishu Makev Harotzen HaPoshet. You see now. You see Makev Yichid Makev Harotzen HaPoshet. He just said Harotzen HaPoshet before. Huh? Right. The meaning exactly. The source of it all.
So the Naran starts after these 2.
After these 2, Now, exactly, They're gone. V'hu Sha'amar V'Haya. That's Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya. Shu B'chinas Yechida. Hainu Rachem Aleinu. That's now already the Rachem Aleinu. V'hu Madrega Aleph B'chlal. This is the first level. Look what he says now in the parentheses. Av'hu Madrega Beis B'frat L'gabe B'chinas Rachamecha Harabim Shebatzmusei Mamish. So the truth is like this. He doesn't want to count this. If you look at it, he hints even to the fact. Why doesn't he say 2? I'll tell you why. Because Atzmus is not a mocker. That's the Rebbe Rashab answering. Atzmus is not a mocker. So when you say Elokei Elam, you can't call it a level. Elokei Elam is the Bal Harotzen, beyond everything. Then comes Rachamecha Harabim. See, when you read it, it comes out of this. Then come the 5 levels. The first of the 5 levels is Rachem Aleinu Yechida Baruch Sha'amar. But in the parentheses he says, in truth, it's the second, because the first is really Rachamecha Harabim Shebatzmusei, which the Rebbe Rashab is saying is Eid Ein Sof. I'm just showing you how the Rebbe Rashab is learning a piece of Shari Tshuva. How would we learn it on our own? When you learn it all, you see the Rebbe Rashab. There's no other way to understand it.
The whole map is in the Zab.
You have to also remember the Rebbe Rashab is an inical from the Mittler Rebbe, so he clearly learned Shari Tshuva probably with his father, who learned it with his father. So, besides everything else. But the truth is, I'm telling you, I've learned it many times. When you read it, you see this is only Pshat. There's no other way to really learn Pshat. It's not like, I would learn differently. It's just not spelled out the levels. Like he doesn't spell out 1, 2, 3 quite. But clearly, you see here there's a Rachamech Harabim. But then the first question is, so then who's Elikei Elam? And the Baal HaRotzen Rachamech Harabim. The Rebbe Rashab adds a lot of Havana when you understand Elikei Elam. Okay. That's Ein Sof. Rachem Aleinu. Rachamech Harabim, he says. No, it's before the Rotz. Rotzen is already the Rotzen Poshet is Baruch She'amar V'Hayelam. He says the Makif Rishon, Makif Rotzen Poshet, Makif V'Yichida.
Yeah, Chayim would be the Estus.
Right. So what's before Rotzen? Ein Sof, Rachamech Harabim.
Before the Estus is the Rotzen.
Before the Rotzen
is the Ayin Beis.
Rachamech Harabim. Read it; it fits.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Rachamaleinu is the Rotzen, right?
Right.
Sure.
Okay. V'amabdrega habeis makiv dechaya.
This is sort of like a preamble to davening.
Makiv hasheni v'hu odeinu zenu. So he doesn't say here that it's Shir Atzmei, but listen to what he does say. Shehu Baruch Hu, ha-mamutza canal, is the mamutza between Baruch She'amar and Amar V'Eser. That's what he calls it. The Rebbe Rashab calls it Shir Atzmei B'Keach, the 10 hidden spheres. Yeah, this is already Baruch Hu. Now you're already revealing the Helam. What the Rebbe Rashab calls is Giloi La'atzmei. That's not even a Giloi La'atzmei. This is already, he's revealing what is concealed in the Rotzen. That's second Makif. Okay, got it? Then comes the next level, it's Mitzamtzim, that's a Tzimtzum. That comes down to the details. Shehu Baruch Emer Ve'esev, Hu Makif HaGimel, HaNeshama, Hu Tzur Mizgavenu. The Lashon of the Rebbe Rashab, this is Ak. Okay? V'achakach Mitzamtzim Lovei B'Gzeira's Dibur Kiyam HaRotzen Shu Gezer B'Dibur U'Mekayim Hu Makif HaDalad B'Chinas Ruach Mogin Yishenu. This is and this is the level of Yitzira the close Akudim, and the Rebbe Rashab adds Havana. Why is it true Mogin Yishenu? Because Mogin is Avram, Vayekod as Yitzchak, Akudim. That's the Rebbe Rashab himself. Everything you see here is exactly this, and what we just learned is an explanation of this section here. That's the fifth makif, the B'chinas Nefesh. For whom mizgav ba'adeinu mamish b'pel mamish. That's ba'adeinu mamish b'pel mamish. The Rebbe Rashab says ba'adeinu al shem ha'posuk Hashem tzvok es imonu mizgav lanu ba'adeinu imonu b'chinas kiruv mamish b'chinas asiyah. So you see the Rebbe Rashab adding Havana in explanation in this. Okay, got that? What? I was just going to read a few more lines. Ach Peter's called Baruch Hora Gilei HaHelam Shu b'chinas Pnimi. And then he's going to continue on. He's going to continue on to the whole makif of Er Chezer, what I discussed before, how it goes from the bottom up.
Should we look at that?
What? I'm not going to read the rest. Huh?
We should look at that.
You could look, but you could look on your own.
This is like a tour guide. And the tour guide's telling us what to expect in the body of the davening. The experiential level is probably supposed to happen next one. That's right. When we actually go to these levels.
Yeah. Well, let's continue on. I'm going to learn the next chapter. Perek Ayin Gimel u'beprotis yesh leimer. Should we stop it and start again? Does that make sense?
You want to do it because of the 2-hour limit?
We've been going for 2 hours, makes sense. Otherwise it'd be 4 hours.
You want to do it now?
We started at 9:10.
So it's been an hour and 10 minutes.
Okay, stop it, and then we'll start from chapter right. Just stop and right away start again.
No, end this thing properly.
Okay, let me just conclude this. So, we just did a summary of chapter 72, pages 135, 136, with a comparison to its source in Shari Tshuva, chapter 10, Shari Tshuva, Shara Tefillah, chapter 10.